Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is how the United States government is pressuring Israel to send weapons to Ukraine. The United States wants Israel to deliver Spike anti-tank rocket systems to Ukraine. Israel has said no. It seems that Israel and the United States have very different perspectives on how to help Ukraine. The United States just arranged the transfer of the M142 mobility artillery rocket systems, otherwise known as HIMARS, as part of their latest aid package to Ukraine, at a whopping cost of $700 million just for the HIMARS. HIMARS, which uses satellite tracking systems, are the most advanced missile system the United States owns. This $700 million system brings the total aid package to Ukraine to $5.3 billion thus far. The United States attached some strings to this gift. They secured a promise from Zelensky that the system will not attack within Russia. And the rocket system is being outfitted with the short 45-mile range missiles instead of the preferred 186-mile range missiles. The pressure on Israel to join the United States in this gift-giving venture to Ukraine came from none other than U.S. Undersecretary for Defense Colin Kahl. Kahl put forth the U.S. request to Amir Eshel, the Director General of Israel's Defense Ministry, while Eshel was on a visit to Washington, D.C. The nature of the request in and of itself was strange, given that Israel's Minister of Defense, Benny Gantz, also met with U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in the White House. And neither of these two top officials made the request of Israel. A joint request from Austin and Sullivan would have been more serious than this underling to underling request. It's not as if the subject of aiding Ukraine was avoided or taboo in the Austin-Sullivan discussion with Gantz. They spoke about helping Ukraine. And on the very day that Israeli Defense Minister arrived in D.C., Israel delivered to Ukraine 2,000 helmets and 500 protective vests. Israel needs to be circumspect in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Israel needs Russia. They need to understand, and this is important, they fear that if Russian soldiers were to be killed by Israeli weapons, it would create a backlash in Russian-controlled Syria. This week alone, the sophisticated Russian S-300 missiles, which are operated by Russian forces in Syria, shot at Israeli fighter jets flying over Syria. This does not portend well for the Russian-Israeli relationship. Israel needs to fly safely over Syria to attack terrorist targets and to intercept weapons transfers coming in from Iran supplying to terrorists. Israel explained to the United States that they will help Ukraine, but not in the way the United States wants to help. Israel has provided Ukraine and will continue to provide Ukraine with non-threatening, life-defensive aid, especially in the form of tons upon tons of food and medicine, mobile hospitals that Israel has sent over, set up, staffed, and operated on the ground inside Ukraine. Israel is walking a very thin tightrope, supporting Ukraine and not isolating Russia at the same time. Israel's safety is dependent on making certain that they can protect themselves from threats coming from Syria. Israel cannot risk ruining their relationship with Russia. And that is one of the prime reasons Israeli Prime Minister Bennett has accepted the role of moderator and has made frequent calls to both Zelensky and Putin, and even embarked on frequent trips to Moscow to speak face-to-face with Russian leader, delivering messages back and forth. In addition to the Spike missiles, included in the U.S. package to Ukraine are counter-artillery radars, the Javelin anti-armor missiles, 155mm howitzer artillery rounds, and Mi-17 helicopters. Israel manufactures the Spike missiles for the United States and has improved upon the original design. And there is an arms agreement between the United States and Israel stipulating that Israel must agree before they are transferred to a third party, i.e. Ukraine. So after Israel's no to Kahl, The undersecretary attempted to end around them. He asked permission for Germany to deliver the spike to Ukraine. Again, Israel said no. In Germany, the spike is being made with Israeli technology for Israel. And by contrast, Israel has the power to reject the transfer of these weapons. In conflict, especially the conflict being waged between Russia and Ukraine, it is not unheard of for weapons to cross into the hands of other parties. Israel does not want its weapons technology to fall into the hands of Russia, and from Russia into the hands of Russians' friends and proxies, who could also be Israel's enemies. It is too easy to reverse engineer technology. Once you understand the weapon, it becomes much easier to develop ways to neutralize its effect on the battlefield. This simple request from the United States to Israel had major long-term, long-range ramifications for Israel. And as a result, Israel just had to say no. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from Medialine. It was then reprinted in the J-Post. Published on June 3rd, 2022, this column was written by Aaron Rosenthal, titled Assassination of IRGC Officer is New Phase in Iran-Israel Shadow War. Analysis, and subtitled, Iran has said it will retaliate for the killing of Colonel Hassan Sayyad Kadayari, which it blames on Israel. This is a very insightful column, analyzing the relationship between Iran and Israel, and taking a careful and critical look at the Iranian threat to strike and attack Israelis and retaliate against Israel for their targeted assassinations of Iranian military leaders and nuclear scientists. This is how Aaron Rosenthal begins. Israel updated the travel warning for its citizens visiting Turkey after the threat of retaliatory attacks from Iran in the wake of the killing of a top colonel, in what some analysts say is an escalation of the simmering conflict between the two countries. The Prime Minister's office released a statement on Monday saying that the Israeli security establishment possesses intelligence of a tangible threat to Israelis in Turkey. There is also a higher threat level in additional countries bordering Iran. This announcement came a week after the execution of Colonel Hassan Sayyad Kadayari, an officer in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, who was shot 5 times by unidentified gunmen on a residential street in Tehran. The head of the IRGC, Major General Hussein Salami, accused Israel of being responsible for the assassination. The martyrs who are murdered by the Zionists are of a much higher status. God willing, we will take revenge against the enemies. He continues his quote by saying, Accusations of Israel's responsibility were corroborated by the New York Times report in the wake of the assassination, which leaked information from an unnamed American official, claiming that Israel had informed the U.S. that it carried out the killing. Now Rosenthal explains that the shadow war between Iran and Israel exists. So it's not a direct war, it's a shadow war behind the scenes. He continues, Israel and Iran have in recent years embarked upon a shadow war, also known as a gray war, in which each side covertly and indirectly attacks specific enemy targets without engaging in or acknowledging a state of open warfare. Israel had repeatedly named Kadayari as a senior official in Iran's clandestine military task force, Unit 840, which is accused of allegedly abducting and assassinating foreign targets. The Iranian government has never formally acknowledged the existence of this unit. In practical terms, Rosenthal goes on to explain that the easiest place to attack Israelis is in Turkey. There have already been attacks in Turkey, and there will be more attacks against Israel in Turkey. He quotes from Israeli expert on Iran, Yigal Tarmon, who says, and this is how he writes it, according to the Prime Minister's office, Turkey has now been assigned a high-risk status for Israeli travelers due to the tangible threat to Israelis in Turkey. An official in the Prime Minister's office declined to provide additional information on that threat. Carmon says that Turkey has a long history as a launching pad for hostile activity against Israeli targets, For example, a member of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Mansour Rassouli, allegedly planned to assassinate an Israeli diplomat at the consulate in Istanbul in April, but was thwarted by Mossad intelligence. This was not the first Iranian attempt to attack Israeli targets on Turkish soil. As Carmon recalled, we know that in the past Iranians have tried to assassinate our consul in Turkey. In the 1990s and recently, they tried to assassinate one of the richest Jewish businessmen, who was also an Israeli citizen. In February, Turkish intelligence services arrested 8 suspects in what was said to be an Iranian plot to assassinate Jewish businessman Yair Geller in retaliation for the killing of Iranian nuclear chief Mohsen Fakhrizadeh in 2020, which was generally attributed again to the Mossad. This column is very helpful as it gives an understanding of the realistic ways Israel is advancing its war against Iran in places like Turkey, and how Iran is hoping to retaliate against Israel. Next up is a column from the J-Post, the Jerusalem Post, written by the paper's editor-in-chief, Yaakov Katz. The column details his ordeal with the Chinese government. The column was published on June 2nd, 2022. It is truly mind-boggling. Katz explains that the Chinese government attempted to kill a story of the Jerusalem Post, an article which was an interview they conducted with the Foreign Minister of Taiwan. Bottom line, the Jerusalem Post did not buckle or back down. The piece is called "Chinese Attempt to Influence Jerusalem Post is Blatant Free Speech Violation." Subtitled, "The Chinese Embassy demanded that the Jerusalem Post remove an exclusive interview of Taiwanese Foreign Minister Joseph Wu and threatened that it may affect China-Israel relations." This is how the piece begins. The Chinese embassy demanded that the Jerusalem Post remove an exclusive interview of Taiwanese Foreign Minister Joseph Wu and threatened that it may affect China-Israel relations. The Chinese ambassador's attempt to influence the Jerusalem Post's coverage of its policies on Taiwan are chutzpah of the first degree and a blatant attempt to damage freedom of speech and press freedoms in Israel. M.K. Moshe Arbel from Shas wrote that in a query to Foreign Minister Yair Lapid on Thursday. The piece describes that the threat made by the Chinese government to the Post and dangled international relations with Israel. More than simply interesting, the actions of the Chinese are very telling here. How little they truly understand both of Israel and the freedom of press. Do they think that the government of Israel has control over the press? Do they think that the Jerusalem Post would capitulate over a threat to downgrade relations? It's mind-boggling to me that this even goes on, and that the Chinese are doing it. The piece continues. A top Chinese diplomat responded by threatening in a telephone call to downgrade relations with the State of Israel and sever ties with the Post unless it deleted the interview. The Chinese embassy's spokesperson later sent a letter expressing its firm opposition and strong condemnation against the interview of a Taiwan independent separatist. The Chinese embassy in Israel expresses firm opposition and strong condemnation against the Jerusalem Post for publishing an exclusive interview with Joseph Wu, a Taiwan independent separatist. To spread separatist noises in total disregard of the embassy's objection, the letter began. The Taiwan question concerning China's core interests and our people's national sentiments is purely China's internal affair that allows no external interference. The one China principle is an international consensus and a basic norm governing international relations. The attempts of Taiwan independence forces to create one China, one Taiwan, or two Chinas will never succeed, it said. China did not let up. Continuing their pressure and tactics, they kept insisting that the J-Post take down the article from their website. They wrote this to the Jerusalem Post. "We demand the Jerusalem Post to respect China's core interest and the Chinese people's national sentiments, refrain from being manipulated by Taiwan independence forces and foreign anti-China forces, and take real actions to eliminate the egregious impact of the interview and contribute to China-Israel relations. The letter concluded. Yaakov Katz, the Jerusalem Post editor-in-chief, wrote back, "Thank you, China, for the note, but let me clarify that respect as you ask for does not include ignoring hard truths and telling stories about Taiwan to the world." Katz responded on Twitter, "That's exactly what the Jerusalem Post will keep doing." And that says it all. Thank you very much, Yaakov Katz and the Jerusalem Post. I'm proud to be a part of your system. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 6 cartoons and memes today. The first poster makes fun of the issue of inflation. We have to laugh about inflation, otherwise we're going to cry. About the rising costs of so many items. The poster reads, 60 may be the new 40, but the $100 bill is the new 20. That's hilarious. This next meme is of Martin Luther posting his 95 Theses on October 31st, 1517 on the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany. The meme reads, "This is probably against the rules, but I'm posting it anyway." And with that, by the way, he changed the world. Those 95 principles were unbelievable. This next post is what we are all thinking. How do you make sense of and then make fun of these new dangers and risks we face, like monkeypox? One person found the way. This reads, "Please take care, everyone. You may have monkeypox and not even know it. You may be asymptomatic." What a great pun. What a great pun. Asymptomatic. If you have ever been to Starbucks, you know when you place an order, they put your name on the cup. They used to write the name with magic marker. Now they print the name label. This meme says it all. Taking her to Starbucks because I forgot her name. It resolves the problem so simply on a date. Unbelievable. This next meme is a classic. A professor standing in front of a lecture hall filled with students is explaining the double negative versus a double positive. He says, there isn't a single language, not one, in which a double positive can express a negative. A student mutters, "Yeah, right." Of course, she's correct. Those two positives, with that tone, are most certainly a negative. Very well done. This last meme will make everyone smile. Just about everyone hates the awful water stains that appear on the ceilings. They're everywhere. In this instance, a creative solution was found to resolve an unsightly problem. Here's the meme. My friend showed me how they fixed the water stain on the ceiling in their office. And you look up and you see they made it into Big Bird. That's wonderful. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Suriname announced that they will be moving their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem very soon. Suriname's foreign minister, Albert Ramdin, was in Jerusalem when he made the announcement in a joint press conference with Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid. Several other countries have already moved or have promised to move their embassies to Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. In May, Ecuador opened an Office of Innovation in Jerusalem, which is seen as a first step to moving their embassy. That's a critical thing. Colombia opened an Office of Innovation in November of 2021. So it's happening. Brazil and Honduras have trade offices in Jerusalem already. The United States opened their embassy, and everyone should remember this, in Jerusalem in May of 2018. Guatemala moved their embassy to Jerusalem quickly after the United States made their move. In June of 2021, Honduras opened its embassy in Jerusalem. Kosovo opened its embassy in Jerusalem in March of 2021. Kosovo. And the Dominican Republic, Malawi, Equatorial Guinea have announced that their intentions are to open embassies in Jerusalem very soon. Suriname and Israel established their diplomatic relations in 1976, but their embassy has been until now in Tel Aviv. According to State Department spokesperson Ned Price, the Biden administration has announced that they are 100% committed to reopening a U.S. consulate in Jerusalem, and the administration of the U.S. is discussing the issue with Israelis and with Palestinians. In May of 2018, as I just mentioned, then U.S. President Donald Trump moved Washington's embassy to Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That move resulted in shutting down of a separate facility in the city that served as the consulate for Palestinians. President Joe Biden, who defeated Trump in 2000, pledged to reopen the consulate, but no date has been set. Israel has publicly opposed the Biden plan and suggested that if the United States is so determined to reopen a consulate, it should be located outside Jerusalem, in the West Bank. According to Price, the spokesperson of the State Department, quote, "There are a number of steps that have to go into the reopening of any diplomatic facility. As you know, there are some, shall we say, unique sensitivities to this particular facility. We are working through the issue with our Palestinian and Israeli partners," unquote. The Times of Israel, citing unidentified U.S. and Palestinian officials, reported that in lieu of reopening the facility, Washington was planning to appoint the current top State Department diplomat for the region, Hadi Amir, as a special envoy to the Palestinians. Asked about the Times of Israel report, Price said he did not have any personal announcements to make. To be continued, this issue has not yet been resolved. Finally, 50 years after the massacre of 11 Israeli Olympic athletes in Munich, Bavarian authorities say that they are releasing the unpublished files on the attack, or almost all the files, all except some confidential files. On September 5, 1992, PLO terrorists who called themselves Black September broke into the Munich Olympic Village. The terrorists murdered 11 Israeli athletes and then escaped. Joachim Herrmann, the top security official in the southern German state, explained that Bavaria will no longer keep any files under wraps, but conceded that federal authorities might still hold confidential files. The goal of Black September was the release of terrorists held in Israeli prisons and 2 comrades held in West German jails. A failed attempt to free the hostages in Munich resulted in the death of all the Israelis. There are still so many unanswered questions about the terrorist attack. Hopefully, newly opened files will shed important light on this tragic episode in Olympic history and Israeli history. The situation is heating up again vis-a-vis Israel and Iran and the Iranian nuclear plans. Iranian state media has reported that Iranian leadership is promising an immediate response to any move against them by the United States, European countries, or Israel, participating in the UN nuclear watchdog group, the IAEA. They said, any political action by the United States and the 3 European countries in the agency will undoubtedly be met with a proportionate, effective, and immediate response from Iran, unquote. The Iranian Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian was quoted as saying in state media. Iranian media also reported that Amir Abdullahian said that the head of the IAEA's visit to Israel, Iran's archenemy, was in conflict with the agency's impartiality. According to a draft resolution seen by the news agency Reuters, the United States, France, Britain, Germany are all pushing for UN nuclear watchdog's Board of Governors to rebuke Iran for failing to answer long-standing questions on uranium traces at undeclared sites. Microsoft announced that it detected and took down an Iranian-linked Lebanese hacking group that had targeted more than 20 Israeli organizations and 1 intergovernmental organization over the past 3 months. The group, known as Polonium, which was tracked by Microsoft's Threat Intelligence Center, the MSTIC, abused OneDrive cloud storage for command and control, the CT, as they attacked Israel. But until now, Polonium had gone undetected. Microsoft indicated that the MSTIC assessed with high confidence that Polonium is Lebanon-based, and also indicated that it could rule with moderate confidence that the observed activity was coordinated with Iran's Intelligence and Security Ministry. The Microsoft statement reads, MSTIC assesses with moderate confidence that the observed activity was coordinated with the other actors affiliated with Iran's intelligence and security ministry, unquote. Polonium created and used legitimate OneDrive accounts, then used those accounts as part of their attack operation. In response to this hack, Microsoft suspended more than 20 malicious OneDrive applications created by Polonium and told the targeted organizations of the attacks against them. According to Microsoft, Polonium primarily targeted Israeli organizations, which specialize in critical manufacturing and IT, along with major organizations in Israel's defense ministry. Microsoft has, in recent past, identified and disabled several other Iranian-linked attacks on Israeli companies. In a scathing attack, Ambassador Vasyl Bodnar, Kiev's ambassador to Ankara, said that Turkey is among the countries buying grain that Russian grain has stolen from Ukraine. Ukraine is now seeking help from Turkish authorities and Interpol so that they are launching an investigation to determine who exactly is involved with the shipments of grain transiting through Turkish waters. Over the past month, reports have emerged accusing Russia of stealing Ukrainian grain. Russia and Ukraine are two of the world's largest grain exporters, but an ongoing war obviously has stopped many of these shipments from leaving the Black Sea. According to a local newspaper, Belarus leader Alexander Lukashenko indicated that Belarus was ready to discuss the transport of Ukraine's grain via Belarus. But there must be compromises, unquote, he said. Ukrainian defense minister and the ministry itself asserts that several grain shipments were being shipped to Syria via Russian cargo ships. Several trucks were also sent to Russia, and around 15,000 tons of grain were exported to Crimea from Kherson. A Russian ship loaded with grain had also headed to Egypt, but Cairo refused to accept and turned it away. Egypt is one of the world's largest wheat importers and usually imports large volumes of Black Sea wheat. Russia has denied all these accusations of stealing Ukrainian wheat, and Russian officials have recently promised to ensure the passage of vital Ukrainian food exports through the Black Sea in exchange for an end of sanctions against them. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that I love puns? Most people, I think, like puns. Word puns can be funny. They can also be a little dorky. The asymptomatic pun I thought was very funny. The Talmud uses word puns all the time, or plays on similar words all the time. A rabbi will switch a letter, in a word, changing the meaning to make a significant point. My favorite one is actually from the Gemara in Tractate Brachot. It's a phrase that is said in Ashkenazi synagogues every Friday night. The phrase and word switch sounds like this. Al tikre banayich, don't read my children, ella, rather, and here's where the word switch comes in, bonayich, my builders. Bonayich instead of banayich. The significance is that we are children of Israel. We are the builders. We build up the world. We don't destroy it. It is a proud part of our Jewish heritage. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.